Ottawa. We pleaded with the federal minister to look at this issue. Yes, they did put the programs in place, Mr. Speaker, over $100 million in BC to help clean up the disaster in BC. They put funding in Ontario to help Ontario. I don't know if it has anything to do with politics, but they have not even acknowledged my letters, Mr. Speaker, to this date. Thank you.
The honourable member for Richmond. Order, please. The honourable member for Richmond has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this government's record of supporting youth at risk is dismal, to say the least. Earlier, Mr. Speaker, when asked the Minister of Justice to give examples of what his government is doing, he went too far out and said that the new breakfast program at schools was going to help our youth at risk and it should bring down our crime rates amongst youth in this province. I think that's a bit of a stretch, to say the least. One of the things that the Minister of Justice did commit to, though, Mr. Speaker, is that he has promised that there would be a public inquiry into the events leading to the death of Teresa McAvoy. Mr. Speaker, we still don't know what the mandate of this inquiry will be, who will lead the inquiry, or when it will take place. So my question to the Minister is, could the Minister tell Nova Scotians what the mandate of this inquiry will be and when Nova Scotians can expect it to begin?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, and the honourable member brings a very good point. I can tell the honourable member that I will be making an announcement immediately after the matter being heard in the Provincial Court of Nova Scotia in June.
The honourable member for Richmond on your first supplementary.
Well, you know, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to see there is some efforts on there, and we're hoping that not only will we be receiving an announcement, but that clearly a lot of the details have already been worked out, and that we're not only going to hear an announcement of a later date of when this is going to take place. Mr. Speaker, as we know, one of the youths has received probation while another is awaiting sentence. But Mr. Speaker is clearly given this minister time to prepare for this inquiry. Mr. Speaker, we all recall that this is the same Minister of Justice that publicly blamed two of his own Crown attorneys for not pushing for the accused to have been held in custody, which may have prevented this from taking place, rather than the minister accepting ministerial responsibility for the error in his own department. So my question is, will the Minister of Justice commit to informing the House what the specific mandate of this inquiry will be before the House rises this spring?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
As I indicated to the honourable member, the government will make clear in early June the name of the commissioner and the mandate of the commission.
The honourable member for Richmond on your final supplementary.
Well, you know, Mr. Speaker, it's entirely possible that we will not be in session in June. And I think it's important that Nova Scotians have an opportunity to see what the mandate will be, so that opposition members and Nova Scotians have an opportunity to make suggestions to the minister or even critique some of the direction that is taking place prior to this inquiry take place. That would be the responsible thing for this government to do, is to allow that to be put before this House prior to it be taking place. Mr. Speaker, we all recall that, as I mentioned before, it is the minister who blamed two of his own Crown attorneys. This is the same minister that on Friday afternoon sent out a release blaming correctional officers for a handgun getting into the Burnside Correctional Facility, saying they were to blame. Again, the minister refusing to accept a responsibility for some of the errors taking place in his own department. So again, I ask the minister, will the minister table in this House the mandate of the inquiry into the unfortunate death of Teresa McAvoy before the House rises?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I've answered the member's question. The government is committed to a public inquiry by a judge and with terms of reference that will satisfy the public. That's what the public will get, and the public will have an opportunity to judge for themselves, Mr. Speaker, in early June.
The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you is to the Minister for Natural Resources, Mr. Speaker. After being made aware of some pressing concerns in a situation in my riding last year, the Minister undertook a tour of this prime recreational area, which is known as Dominion Beach, Mr. Speaker, and I thank him for that. Unfortunately, as he may also be aware, Mr. Speaker, that beach is closed more often than it's open during the summer months because of sewage outfalls and erosion. So I want to ask the Minister, what is he prepared to do this year to make sure that the beach is opened more than it's closed?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and through you to the member opposite. That's one of the many treasures that we have in the province of Nova Scotia is all of our beaches, and Dominion Beach is another one of them, Mr. Speaker. And my department will do everything in their power to enhance that beach and do the cleanup that's proper on the beach. But there are other agencies that have to lead onto the cleanup. The problem with the beach, it's not into the designated beach area, it's just outside, and CBRM has to take the lead onto that, Mr. Speaker, and we have met with those people.
I'm a member for Cape Breton Centre on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, you know, I'm sure that this minister realizes that Dominion Beach is not only a recreational tool for CBRM, but indeed an economic tool that attracts tourists, Mr. Speaker, because thousands of visitors come to that great beach every year, and those returning to New Waterford and Dominion and areas on vacation go there as a recreational reasons, Mr. Speaker. So I want to ask the minister through you again, if you understand what Dominion Beach means to the economy of CBRM, what are you doing, Minister, to keep in touch and to get CBRM to do something?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and through you to the honourable member. I can tell the member and all members of what we've been doing. We've been meeting with the councillor that represents the area. We've met with the engineers from CBRM, and we have asked them to make some dramatic changes to the sewer outfall that's going into the harbour adjacent to Dominion Beach. And we have offered the expertise from our department in conjunction with the engineering team from CBRM to come up with a proposal, Mr. Speaker, to clean up the area so the people can enjoy the beach.
I'm a member of Cape Breton Centre on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My final supplementary then is to the minister responsible for municipal relations. As he very well knows, I wrote to him last July 12th asking him to work with myself and the municipality to deal with the sewage outfall conditions that are so negatively affecting that beach. So I want to ask him, why have you not made the effort to work with the municipality to restore Dominion Beach to the prime recreational area that it should be? Why, Minister?
The Honourable Minister of Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, the member is correct. He did provide me with a letter, and so did the councillor. I met with the councillor as well. In December of this year, our department offered through the Provincial Capital Assistance Program $250,000 towards this project, 50% of the cost. The municipality was not prepared or unable to move forward, Mr. Speaker. We will continue to work with the municipality. We will continue to offer assistance where and when we can to ensure that this environmental hazard or area is cleaned up, Mr. Speaker, and we expect that will be to the benefit of all Nova Scotians, particularly those in the member's riding.
The Honourable Member of Kings West.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Natural Resources. The Department of Natural Resources is currently conducting a review of provincial wildlife management areas, game sanctuaries. They are re-evaluating the need to have these sites remain as sanctuaries, which means that these sites could in fact become delisted, which allows for potential problems, including an increase in clear cutting. My question to the Minister, will your department allow these sites, like Blandford, Liscombe, Chignecto, to be delisted?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, through you to the honourable member, maybe tomorrow there could be a snowstorm, but I don't think that's likely. But I will tell you, Mr. Speaker, and all members of this House, we are doing a review. We're open and transparent. We gave the people extra time to put their comments into my department. I will review all the comments that come in after the deadline, Mr. Speaker, and I'll make my decision based on to that.
The Honourable Member for Kings West on your first supplementary.
Well, the department has already evaluated these sites based on a list of criteria. Several have been given a score of a 0 out of 30, including Blandford. A question to the Minister. How can the Minister say that the department is still evaluating these sites when the department has already made its decision?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The member made it very clear that the department has made an analysis onto the sanctuaries. I can tell him that this minister has not made an analysis because he has not had all the information provided to him because the deadline has not expired yet. And when that deadline expires, I will review every document that comes in and I will make my decision based on all the information that's given to me.
The Honourable Member for Kings West on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister talks a good game about public consultation. However, we have residents the South Shore area today, and I'm pleased the minister is prepared to meet with them. But your department has asked the public for their input. Well, Brad Armstrong, a resident of the Lunenburg County area, through rural delivery, has said this is a real step backward, and he has tried to contact your office several times now and has yet to receive a response. Are you willing to finally listen and have real consultation by going to the affected areas?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, I can tell that member and all members that I have visited the majority of the sanctuaries in this province. And Mr. Speaker, I can tell that member and all members know in this House that this minister is always available. All they had to do is pick up the phone call and make a phone call to me, and I always will reply, Mr. Speaker. That's my policy since I've been in this department. It's an open door policy, and it will be until I'm no longer there, Mr. Speaker. And I think that may be years to come, Mr. Speaker, I may add. But, Mr. Speaker, I still believe in open and transparency, and that's exactly why we're doing the review, Mr. Speaker. I want to have the input from the citizens of the communities that it's affecting, and that's why we're having the review, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Transportation and Public Works. Mr. Speaker, the Louisbourg Highway and the Manitou Highway are vital infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Transportation and Public Works regarding the Louisbourg Highway and the Manitou Highway. The Minister is very familiar with Route 22, which is the main corridor feeding to the historic town of Louisbourg. And that highway was last upgraded in 1970-71. I would ask the Minister of what plans he has for either the Louisbourg Highway or the Manitou Highway in the upcoming fiscal year.
Now, the Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to be able to assure the honourable member that we're going to do it this year, but I can't do that. But it is certainly a high priority in the department.
The honourable member for Cape Breton West on your first supplementary.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Manitou Highway was done in the mid-1960s, and since then there was a 2.5 kilometre upgrade in 1999, and there remains approximately 7.5 kilometres. The Minister has received considerable petitions before this House, as well as representation from residents with considerable automobile damage to their vehicles. In some cases, Mr. Speaker, there's no asphalt whatsoever. There's just simply dirt in sections of the road. And I would ask if the Minister would consult with his staff and give considerable consideration to paving the Manitou Highway.
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Mr. Speaker, yes, that will be done.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton West on your final supplementary.
Yes. Now, Mr. Speaker, when he says that will be done, does that mean it's going to be paved, or is he going to consult with his staff? That's essentially what I need some clarification on. Perhaps if he could provide a little more detail, I would certainly appreciate that. Yes.
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
I guess the honourable member must have been paying attention to my answer. I'm not just too sure what I said now, but Mr. Speaker, we have considerable work going on in Cape Breton this construction season. In fact, Mr. Speaker, this gives me an opportunity, perhaps in my answer, to remind my friends in Ottawa that we're presently carrying out a major project on the Cox Heath interchange and the Sydney River Bridge. Mr. Speaker, this is a national highway system piece of highway, which, by the rules, the federal government shares 50%. This is costing $21 million, and the federal government is contributing $3.25 million. So I would expect that our friends opposite would be encouraging their federal members to pursue federal funding for this province for the national highway system.
The Honourable member for Cape Breton Nova.
Let me get up. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question to you is for the Minister of Community Services. Mr. Speaker, Brass Tacks Industries offers broadened day programs, vocational skill training and assistance with employment transition for 28 clients. These people with intellectual and physical challenge are given more opportunity to live fuller, more independent lives. Unfortunately, Brass Tacks Industries is struggling to find enough funding to hire adequate staff to continue its programming. My question to you, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Community Services. Why does this department allow this vital service to continually struggle with inadequate funding?
Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member opposite for bringing up the fine work done by Brass Tack Industries. Mr. Speaker, Brass Tack Industries, like many other organizations operating for those clients, does a fabulous job, and we've been working with them, Mr. Speaker. We are aware that they want to expand their operation. We have tried to be accommodating, and in fact, I'm pleased to say that recently they were given an additional grant so they could hire some extra people to do some of these worthy projects that they want to take on. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Cape Breton Nova, and your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is the problem from living from grant to grant. We're talking about core funding. Core funding. This agency has gone through 95 staff in 3 years because of inadequate funding and its impact on employees. Right. The clients deserve consistency and stability. So my question to the minister, when is he going to provide stability to this organization and its clients?
Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I want to assure the member opposite that there is an operating grant that's in place for them. There's per diems that attach to the clients, and that we stand by those commitments to the clients of Brass Tack Industries and that organization.
Member for Cape Breton Nova, and your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the most vulnerable in our society. Mr. Speaker, this agency is required to offer 5 programs while its source of funding chooses not to provide the adequate resources to do so. They are constantly fundraising in an economically challenged area to make up the difference, but it's become more and more of a challenge. And like I stated last week to this minister, the nonprofit organizations in this province have become beggars. My final question to the minister, why does his government continue to turn its backs on people with disabilities by underfunding necessary programs?
Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Well, I thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member opposite for allowing me to remind him that last November, when we got an extra $11 million in the department, one of the areas that we did target for the first time in years was infrastructure programming for adult service centers like Brass Tack Industries, and in fact, they have put into submission. We continue to work with them, and we hope to bring that to a successful conclusion. I want to thank the member opposite for allowing me to point out that for the first time in the years, this government has stepped up to the plate for adult service centers. Thank you, sir.
The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Transportation and Public Works. Mr. Speaker, back in 2002, the department released a 10-year need assessment of our highways in Nova Scotia. That study found that Nova Scotia has a $3.4 billion deficit in road construction, and it will grow to $4.4 billion if action is not taken. Mr. Speaker, my question to the minister is, could the minister indicate to this House what, if any, follow-up has been made to this study?
Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Mr. Speaker, I think the honourable member is aware of the of why that deficit occurred, which was the result of the poor performance of the government of the day between 1993 and 1999. And secondly, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that the honourable member is aware that the federal government has taken from this province over just the last 4 years, $800 million, and has returned to this province something in the order of about $13 million.
Well, member for Victoria the Lakes, on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What this member is aware of is that there is an extreme deficit, a financial problem that is facing the Department of Transportation with $3.4 billion in deficit. And I coined the phrase yesterday,
being pro-regressive, if there's such a thing that you can understand, because just prior to the Honourable Minister mentioned about friends opposite. Does that make us opposite friends? There seems to be talking in oxymorons, Mr. Speaker. Looking forward to a $4.4 billion deficit. What is the solution, Mr. Speaker? Does the Minister have a long-term plan for addressing the deficit rather than to sit back and watch it grow?
Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Mr. Speaker, the core business of the Department of Transportation and Public Work is paving roads, not printing money.
The member for Victoria Lakes, on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I guess it's a pave-as-you-grow approach and blame Ottawa for everything. You have a problem, it's their fault. Mr. Speaker, if we want the roads fixed in a complete way, and we need a long-term plan. And finally, one more time, Mr. Speaker, to the Honourable Minister, what is your plan?
Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Mr. Speaker, my plan, if I had my way, would be to change the federal government.
The honourable member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question, too, is to the Minister of Transportation and Public Works. Mr. Speaker, in our rural communities are to attract...
Order, please. The honourable member for Pictou West has the floor.
Maintain the ones they have and thrive. They need proper transportation infrastructure. Now, in Shelburne County, we have a road called the Upper Clyde River Road that people there have long complained about the deplorable condition of their road. The area has changed over the last 20 years from being a hunting and fishing and recreational area into a community today of 134 residents and 4 businesses. This community is trying to grow, it's trying to thrive, but the government mindset has left it behind with a road that in no way can continue to safely handle the current traffic load, let alone any future increases. So my question to the Minister, for area residents, this fight has gone on far too long. The same stories exist all over this province. Will the Minister explain to Nova Scotians his government's plan to repair rural roads?
The honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Well, Mr. Speaker, rural roads are repaired by getting out the paving machines and paving them. That's fairly obvious. Mr. Speaker, we are doing the very best we can with the resources that we have, and we are indeed making improvement, Mr. Speaker, as evidenced by the satisfaction report which we do every year. And, Mr. Speaker, this is done by an outside consulting firm, and the satisfaction with the Nova Scotia roads has increased, Mr. Speaker, from around something less than 50% in 1999 to something just over 60% at the present time. And, Mr. Speaker, I would suggest to you that that is very good progress.
The honourable member for Pictou West on your first supplementary.
Speaker, I don't think in that survey you asked any Harley-Davidson riders, did you? But certainly around the province there are many, many complaints about roads in this province. The Upper Clyde River Road is barely wide enough for a school bus to pass another vehicle, and the road is frequently used by logging vehicles. There's also a very large safety factor here. So, Mr. Minister, when are you going to bring the Clyde River Road up to an acceptable standard for the traffic that it must handle?
The honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works, you have about 40 seconds.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know why we are so concerned about that one particular article written by one particular person. The reading that we are getting from the majority of the tourists that come to Nova Scotia is that yes, our roads could be better, but however, they accept the fact that they're going to drive slowly anyway to take notice of or provide an opportunity to look at the scenery and the landscape.
Order, please. Time allotted for question period has expired. The honourable member for Halifax Fairview on introduction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to draw the attention of the House to the Speaker's Gallery, where we have Brian Flynn, who's well known to this House as a member of the Legislative Press Gallery. But more importantly, Mr. Speaker, beside Brian are his parents, Errol and Anne, who live in the Fairmount subdivision in the constituency of Halifax Fairview. I just want to say he's a very good boy, a very fine journalist. And I'd like to ask the Flynns to rise and receive the welcome of the House.
Thank you. Opposition members' business. The honourable member for Cape Breton South. The honourable member for Guysville Sheet Harbour on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in the East Gallery, too, today we have from Moses River in Halifax County. Two people that are involved with the Bay of Islands Community Center. We have Gail Martin and Jürgen Toiven. I'd ask them to rise and receive the warm welcome of the House.
To welcome our guests to the gallery today, the honourable member for Cape Breton South on opposition members' business.
Mike.
The honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise on a point of order. During a question period, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition indicated in one of his questions about the schedule to the Financial Measures Act, and particularly around the FOIPOP Review Office. I'm advised by staff that Department of Justice staff had communicated to the Honourable Member's Office that, in fact, the reason that the FOIPOP Review Office was removed from the schedule was because it is a public service vote and doesn't belong on the schedule where mostly Crown corporations are found. It was purely a correction, Mr. Speaker, and in no way, and that is a matter of information for the honourable member.
Clarification of facts. The honourable member for Cape Breton South on opposition members' business.
On to something relevant. Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill number 170?
Bill number 170. The honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Certainly pleased today to speak on this bill. The bill amends the Income Tax Act to allow a volunteer emergency worker to deduct from that person's taxable income the amount of $500 if the person performed at least 50 hours of volunteer service and $1,000 if the person performed 100 or more hours volunteer service. Now, we all know the value of our volunteer firefighter service throughout Nova Scotia. I'm sure every member here in the House at one time or another has attended a volunteer firefighter banquet or some event in their community. So they're a very, very important part of the safety net here in the province of Nova Scotia. They, in fact, have a history of being the first responders at many emergencies on the highways of Nova Scotia, and certainly to many other emergencies that occur in our communities of a great variety of nature. And the one thing about the volunteer fire service that we have in the province is that it is 24 hours a day that these volunteers are on call. And as we know, there are very few professions now that have that kind of a commitment to make. They have their vehicles, of course, that they travel to fires. They potentially risk their lives to save the lives of others. So when we take a look at the important value that this group of people have in the life of the province and the level of commitment, I think this is a small measure that we would in fact be given to them to recognize that kind of contribution. Those who have been around fire departments, and I had the opportunity to be a 15-year member of the Kingston Volunteer Fire Department, so I know firsthand of the selflessness that many of these firefighters approach their volunteer work. It's not uncommon to go to a fire department banquet and have people recognized, in fact, by the province and by the federal government for 25, 40, 50, and even more years of service. In fact, there's one in the neighboring community of Middleton who will soon be recognized for 60 years of service, which is simply outstanding. So we've experienced a number of dry summers over the last few years, and volunteer firefighters have been crucial to securing quick ends to potential disasters. So I think this is, again, a time to have this bill recognize not just the efforts, but also the monetary output that volunteer firefighters have. And this bill will do two things. One, it will provide a small but important reward to compensate for the time commitment. including hours of practice, time on call, and hours fighting fires. We know today that firefighters have to get their level 1, their level 2. They come into the Waverley Fire School and go through that training. And so it is, I think, some opportunity for us as MLAs through legislation to recognize this work. We've been hearing that it's becoming more difficult to recruit volunteer firefighters. In fact, last year, in one of my conversations with the fire chiefs in the Valley, Watson Armstrong in Kingston, and Wayne Ritzie in Aylesford, Stephen Palmer in Berwick, and Stuart Johnston in Waterville, this was one of the things that they most commented on. It wasn't so much our green light legislation. They were quick to comment on that, but it was the fact that getting volunteers, getting young members of the community to come forward. So this is, I feel, one little mechanism that can be used, this tax credit that they would receive if they put in volunteer hours. And this is very, very easy to monitor, since, as we know, especially during a call to the fire department, their time is monitored, time in, time out. And so each of the fire chiefs said that this was now one of their biggest challenges as their departments age, bringing on new firefighters. In fact, last year, for the first time in the 60-year history of the Kingston Fire Department, they had an ad in the newspaper. The very first time to fill their complement of 50 members, they had to run an ad. And so it really is a sign of the times. And there's no question rural communities need an adequate number of firefighters. Unlike HRM and other urban areas that have paid firefighters, the rural firefighting organization, the volunteer fire departments, in fact, are what I call a cornerstone volunteer group in our communities across Nova Scotia. And in fact, we know their work is well beyond firefighting. They are also organizations that do a lot of fundraising. They pick up on the good causes, the needs of the community, that they will go out and have a fundraiser to support. One of the real concerns then is having the adequate number to make up the complement of each of these fire departments. And our rural communities, I feel, run a very, very serious risk if they don't have an adequate number in their departments. So I think this tax incentive may help increase the numbers, keep and stabilize the numbers throughout our departments right across the province. And with that, I will share my time with my colleague from Preston.
Order, please. You only have about 30 seconds, so the honourable member for Preston.
Thank you. Time's up, I guess.
30 seconds. 30 seconds.
I would just like to echo the comments of my honourable colleague, and it's a very important bill. It's very important for the members of the volunteer fire service that give so much and live in. It's a very dangerous job for them to do this, and at all hours while they have a full-time job, most of them take their time, all their spare time, and donate to the community and the volunteer fire service. So I would fully support this bill and hope that the government will call it and allow this to happen in the budget as they bring the budget forward. Thank you.
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to join this debate, and I'll be sharing my time with the member from Kings North. But I think, as the former speaker indicated, Mr. Speaker, we all know friends. We all have many friends and men and women in our community that serve as firefighters. And indeed, we know firefighters perform a valuable service to our province. Indeed, we have 315 volunteer fire departments and more than 7,500 volunteer firefighters who put their lives at risk and on the line to protect us from the ravages of fire. We know in 2002 there were 742 reported fires in the province. These resulted in 12 deaths and 21 injuries, of which 10 were firefighters. Clearly, volunteer firefighters deserve recognition. While I appreciate the honourable member's intention to recognize the contribution of firefighters, I'm not convinced this is the way to go. I guess it goes without saying this government strongly values the contribution of firefighters, and we have taken steps to recognize those, Mr. Speaker. In 2003, our government introduced the Firefighters Compensation Act, which allowed benefits to be paid to firefighters who contacted specific types of cancer under the workman's compensation. The insurance and health coverage are available to all firefighters, both paid and volunteer, because cancer doesn't differentiate for those individuals who make a career of fighting fires or those who give freely of their time. But it isn't just about house fires and brush fires anymore, Mr. Speaker. The whole role of fire and volunteer service is expanding more and more. More volunteer departments now deliver vehicle extrication, advanced medical first response, water rescue, and hazardous material response capabilities. In fact, a typical fire service volunteer spends about 10 hours each week training or in operation. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, in 2002, we introduced the Volunteer Fire Services Act that formally recognizes the contributions of volunteer firefighters and volunteer fire departments across the province. The Act authorizes Cabinet to designate each day one day each October as Volunteer Fire Service Recognition Day. It provides an accidental death benefit of $100,000 to the family or estate of a volunteer firefighter who is killed in the line of duty. And furthermore, the legislation provides volunteer fire departments with some protection from seizure of assets, materials, or financial assets for claims of damages. And since 1999, we have waived the vehicle registration fees and provided special license plates for volunteer firefighters as well as for ground search and rescue organizations. These distinctive license plates are not only a symbol of our appreciation of the job they do, it makes it clear to those people and emergency workers and ensures their access to restricted areas during emergencies. As of April the 30th of this year, there were 8,784 volunteer firefighter license plates in circulation throughout this province. While the province values and appreciates the work done by volunteers across the province, the tax system is not designed to deliver those kind of benefits. Some volunteer firefighters in Nova Scotia already benefit from a tax deduction provision at the federal level. The first $1,000 of income earned by paid emergency service volunteers is exempt from income tax, both provincially and federally. And there are more than 250,000 volunteers across this province who contribute an average of 160 hours a year each. We couldn't possibly reward each one of those volunteers, and we know the monetary reward isn't why Nova Scotians volunteer for their communities in the first place. Therefore, that's why we suggest that's not an appropriate way to go, and the tax credit is simply not the way to go. We recognize the volunteers through other ways, Mr. Speaker. We recognize them through providing the health services, as I indicated. We recognize them through volunteer for the license plates, and we have already set up the contributions that we have for the tax system for those. So, Mr. Speaker, with that, as I indicated, I'll share my time with the member from Kings North.
Honourable member for Kings North.
Thank you very much. The Minister of Finance has listed several things that this government has done to help our volunteer firefighters, things that I'm very, very proud of that we help participate in. I too want to laud our volunteer firefighters. I have in my riding two main stations, the one in Kentville with Chief Sean Ripley and one in Canning with Chief Terry Porter, and then two substations. We have a new substation in Halls Harbour because of the distance, no, not Halls Harbour, Scotts Bay, because of the distance from Canning. It's served with Canning, but they established a new fire station there, and the community has rallied around and supported it very, very well. And then a substation in Woodville, and I know that substation well because when I had a car accident, they were the ones who came to my rescue and to my aid. And so the role of our volunteer firefighters in our rural communities in terms of delivering aid and help in times of various types of crisis is so incredibly important. As the Minister of Finance was saying, this role has been expanded in recent years, and in the Canning Fire Department, in conjunction with the Scots Bay Fire Department, one of the roles that they've taken on is in helping people who are stranded out at Cape Split or who get in trouble out at Cape Split because of the fact that it's now provincial land. And they've been very, very helpful in that regard. Our volunteers are really the backbone of our rural communities, Mr. Speaker. When I go into many rural communities, in my riding, it's the Volunteer Fire Department, the Legion, the Lions Club, the Women's Institute. These are the organizations that keep our rural communities vital and alive, and we have so much to be thankful for. But the question is, how do we motivate volunteers? And that's what the person who introduced this this bill from Kings West, the member from Kings West, that's what he was really getting at. How do you promote more volunteers? He raised the plea that not enough people are volunteering for our fire departments. And this is an issue I've been very interested in for many years. And I've gone to the volunteer banquets that we have at the Westin Hotel. And what I've noticed, and those are volunteers who are lauded from across the province, from their various communities. And what I've noticed, Mr. Speaker, at every volunteer banquet, I think I've been to all 6 since I've been in office, at every one, the vast majority of people who volunteer their time are also committed in their religious institution. That there's a correlation between religious activity and adherence in the religious institution, be it church, temple, synagogue, and also their willingness to volunteer for the good of the community in whatever form, be it a firefighter or some other form. And I was reading a book looking at the American situation, and the Gallup poll in the States found exactly the same thing, that as people are committed to their religious institution, if they have people of strong faith, they are much more willing to volunteer. And so really it's not so much the monetary reward that would get people to volunteer if this correlation is right, and I think it is. It's this sense that these are people who want to give and who want to share what they have with others, that they know that they've been blessed by God, they've been given certain talents, gifts, whatever, and so they want to share. And so that's how we motivate people. And there's a little poem that is fairly well known about a volunteer that backs this up. It reads, "Why be a volunteer? It's not for the money, it's not for fame, it's not for personal gain, but it's for love of fellow man. It's just to lend a helping hand. It's just to give the tithe of self. That's something you can't buy with wealth. It's not the thank yous accepted with pride. It's just that feeling deep inside. It's that reward down in your heart. It's the feeling that you've been a part of helping others far and near. That's what makes you a volunteer." And I think really that's at the heart of it. I'm not speaking against helping our firefighters in other ways, and we've done lots of those, as the Minister of Finance has illustrated. But I really think that our volunteer firefighters are motivated by this selfless feeling of wanting to care and to give and to share with others. And I think that's really, Mr. Speaker, what lies at the heart of their volunteerism. And as I said, coming from a religious background myself, the correlation between high religious activity and volunteerism is one that I find particularly gratifying. And so I want to thank the Speaker for the opportunity to advance these few thoughts.
Thank you, and recognize now Member Sackville-Cobeau.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a pleasure for me to stand and speak on this piece of proposed legislation. It's a very important issue throughout our province, Mr. Speaker, because there's thousands of individuals, men and women, who donate their time and their energy and their commitment to their family to provide a service for all Nova Scotians, and that's our volunteer. individuals in this province, especially our volunteer firefighters. And I know that our medical first responders are quite active in a lot of the communities throughout our province in providing an important service to Nova Scotians and ensuring that their safety and well-being is looked after in all the communities throughout this province, Mr. Speaker. It's important that we recognize some of the duties that these first responders do, Mr. Speaker, and I'm encouraged to see that in this piece of legislation that they make reference to medical or ambulance technicians, and I would hope that the member that brought this forward would entertain a change to that to include medical first responders. I think that's a more appropriate title to use these days, because there's so many fire departments in our province that actually do medical first response. There's a lot that don't, and one of the main reasons they don't is because of funding, Mr. Speaker. To have a department commit to providing emergency medical services or medical first response is a huge undertaking, Mr. Speaker, and I think that really shows the underlying problem in the province is the need for government to fund adequately these associations, organizations that provide these services, and really provide it for free, Mr. Speaker, to the taxpayers of this province. Many volunteers in this province, firefighters, medical first response, if you were to ask them why they do this, it's not because they want to get paid, Mr. Speaker. We do have a great number of paid professional firefighters, and definitely our paramedics in the province that do it for a career, but thousands of them, and as the Minister, I think, of Finance stated, there's about 7,500 volunteers in this province that provide this important service. And what we got to recognize is that when these departments take on the task of providing these services for the residents, they need to know that the government's there to adequately fund these services. And many of these fire departments and volunteer organizations find it hard to attract new volunteers to their organizations. And one of the main reasons, Mr. Speaker, is because of the commitment they need to give to these organizations. One, to fundraise for them to allow them to provide the services for the residents. And that's a major issue, Mr. Speaker. It's hard enough for an individual to decide to volunteer, especially in a volunteer fire department, and then once you are committed to that, you realize that the commitment there is not just to go out and provide medical services or firefighter services for that area or their community, Mr. Speaker. It's their need to have to step up and fundraise in order for this department to continue those services. And I think that's where we need to bring light to, is to recognize that government needs to take a better stance on our volunteer organizations in the province and hopefully encourage and promote their activities in this field, in firefighting and in emergency services, Mr. Speaker, because they find it harder and harder every day to continue to provide these services. And government needs to step in and recognize this and like I said, give adequate funding to these organizations. They find it hard to provide the insurance costs for the members that belong to their organizations, Mr. Speaker. The equipment cost these days, especially for emergency services, is through the roof, Mr. Speaker. It's hard for these organizations and departments to just afford to keep a well-stocked ambulance or medical first response unit, Mr. Speaker. I know you're quite aware of areas in your the area you represent, Mr. Speaker, and what commitment and how much funds it takes to provide these services for residents, Mr. Speaker. So this, like I say, this piece of legislation brings awareness around the need for government to increase funding to volunteer organizations. I had the opportunity before my career as a paramedic, Mr. Speaker, to be a volunteer firefighter in Sackville. We had a great organizations out there, Mr. Speaker, the Sackville Volunteer Firefighters Organization, who provided services for many years to the residents of Sackville and the surrounding areas. And they did that at no cost, Mr. Speaker. But years ago, because of being probably more wealthy organization or being able to access funding through the old county at the time, Halifax County, Mr. Speaker, they were able to obtain an honorarium. And the county actually provided funding to the fire department to give an honorarium to the members to offset some of the cost, I think, that this bill is supposed to do, hopefully if it passes, is to give funds back to those volunteers who provide this service. So the people of Sackville and the volunteers in Sackville were able to get funding through the old county system, Mr. Krieger, to provide this honorarium to the firefighters who spent so much of their time and energy and cost to providing the service, especially for the firefighter services in that area, Mr. Speaker. And what that does is it shows an inadequacy with the municipalities in the province to able to fund this. We were fortunate, I was fortunate as a member of the Sackville Volunteer Firefighters Organization to receive an honorarium. It was because our municipality was able to provide that funding, but there's many organizations out there that live in or provide services to municipalities that can't afford this, Mr. Speaker. We hear it every day in this floor of the legislature how hard it is for our municipalities, especially in our rural communities, to just provide the services they provide on an everyday basis. Not that what volunteers provide to this organization, Mr. Speaker, or to the communities. The other question is the cost involved with this piece of legislation, Mr. Speaker. The Minister of Finance indicated 7,500 volunteers, and if you were to look at if they were to qualify for the $1,000 tax break, Mr. Speaker, that's about $8 million that would be taken away from what I would hope the government would look at, recognize as putting back into those organizations. I would love for the Minister of Finance to stand up and state that they're going to provide the volunteer organizations in this province with $8 million. Because I think if you were to ask volunteers why they do it, they don't do it for the money, Mr. Speaker. They don't expect to get paid to volunteer in this province. What they expect, I would hope, that if they give their time and their energy, is that the province is there to support them with their costs, especially the insurance to these organizations, the equipment they need. Mr. Speaker, the equipment that volunteer firefighters organizations use is very expensive. The cost of one vehicle, a pumper, for instance, Mr. Speaker, could run into the $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 mark, Mr. Speaker. So what we need is to ensure that these departments that are providing the services have the adequate funding. And if they don't, Mr. Speaker, if they belong to a municipality that just can't afford an increase or provide that funding to the organization, that it comes back to the government's responsibility, Mr. Speaker. It's their responsibility to ensure that all Nova Scotians are protected and have the same level of care, same level of service provided in downtown Halifax here as you would in Yarmouth or in Digby or any other part of the province, Mr. Speaker. It's the government's responsibility to ensure that. And I think I would like to see rather $8 million going to those volunteers, which they needed. I'm not saying they don't. I would hope the government will look at this bill and say, well, maybe it's time we step in and fund these organizations to hopefully to continue their support, because it's very hard for organizations to attract volunteers. Today, Mr. Speaker, there's an increased commitment to family and the cost of living in this province this year, and every year, Mr. Speaker, it goes up every year. It's harder for individuals and families to make ends meet. So I would hope that this government would look at this piece of legislation and realize the need for proper and adequate funding in order for these people to continue the service they're providing. Many of these organizations have been around for hundreds of years, Mr. Speaker, and now they realize the cost involved in providing these services. It's hard for them to say, no, we're not going to do it anymore. When a small community has been adequately serviced for many years by the volunteers, by the men and women that work in the stores in the community, by members of the legislature, I know that some have volunteered in the past. It's harder for them to continue to do that if they don't have the proper funding, Mr. Speaker. And I would hope that the government looks at this piece of legislation and realize the need to address this important issue. And I think they should realize the importance of funding these volunteer organizations. They provide a great resource and save this province millions of dollars every year, Mr. Speaker. And I think it's time that they adequately fund these services so that it isn't hard for these organizations to provide volunteers.
Thank you. Recognize the honourable member for Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise and say a few words on this bill, an act to amend Chapter 217 of the revised statute of 1989, the Income Tax Act. And I want to commend the member from Clare for bringing this forward, and as well as recognize an MP from Cape Breton, Mr. Cusner, who has also done a similar thing federally. This is a small token of our appreciation for the number of volunteers who not only are volunteering on our fire departments, Mr. Speaker. I think if you read the beginning of this Act, it says $500 of a taxpayer performed in a taxation year of at least 50 hours, but less than 100 hours in volunteer service as an ambulance technician, as a firefighter, or a person who assists in search and rescue in individuals or in other emergency situations. I think when we look around our many communities and we look at the volunteers who give up their so many weekends and evenings and are on call at all hours of the day and night to go out and put their lives, really, Mr. Speaker, at risk to ensure that we as a community feel safe. This is a very small token of our appreciation. When I look around the constituency of Annapolis, and I see in the community of Springfield, Middleton, Bridgetown, Lawrencetown, in Port Lorne, Margarettsville, Annapolis, and Nicktaw, the different volunteer firefighting services that are provided. What's rather interesting is the different sizes of those departments. Some covers a very large territory and have a number of pieces of equipment, and others really just service a very small community. But each one of those communities takes so much pride in the service that is being provided by those fire departments that it really provides them ownership of that department. And the fact that we would recognize those individuals in those communities who have stepped up and said, we're here to ensure that your safety and the safety of your family and children with a very small token would go a long way, I think, for us to begin to recognize the volunteers in our community. Mind you, a very small number of volunteers, but yet a very well-deserving group of volunteers. When I look around in my constituency, the number of things that is happening by not only the volunteer firefighter, but the emergency measures organization and the men and women who serve in those groups. And I look at the way I received a note from a friend of mine who was in the process of creating an evacuation plan for a nursing home that he owns and runs with his wife. And in the note, he expressed how in the evacuation plan, the fire chief from the Bridgetown community, Robbie Brown, was on hand to ensure that was being carried out in the proper way. This is on a weekend when after Mr. Brown has spent his week doing not only his job, but all the other hours that he's already volunteered for the department and being on call. So I think that's the kind of individual we're talking about. One of the other things which has taken place around my constituency, which all too often is forgotten about, when a firefighter, and many of them who go out, or even emergency measures organization when they go out, they're really entering in many cases, in some cases in danger, Mr. Speaker. I know of a constituent of mine who I know quite well on a very personal level, who was involved in a motor vehicle accident on his way to responding to a fire accident. Mr. Speaker, that accident occurred probably 2.5 years ago now, and quite frankly, his life has been altered by that and changed forever in his unselfish act of going out and providing a volunteer service for us. This piece of legislation which is before you is in no way enough compensation for him or any other volunteer who was injured doing that, but it is a recognition from us to be able to say, you know what, that we value what you're doing. We value it enough to put a very small token of our appreciation on it. And in their case, in many cases for volunteers, they don't do it, they don't want to be recognized. They don't feel the need to be recognized. But this is not, in my view, any way to say that this is what your job is valued at. It's a way to just say we very much appreciate the fact that when we call, you're there and ready to support us. And Mr. Speaker, one of the other parts of this bill is that if you do over 1,000 hours or more volunteering, that we will recognize that with a $1,000 tax credit. The other thing is each one of these need to be verified and would be verified obviously to ensure that the bill was being appropriately monitored by the municipality or by those fire chiefs. One of the things that happened, and I'll give the government credit, was when they brought in the fire plates and to volunteer firefighters, and it was amazing how that small recognition went a long way, not only to, I think, encourage the ranks and bolster the ranks a certain amount in some of these volunteer firefighters, but it was a way to say thank you. It was a way for us as a legislature to be able to say thank you to them. The government needs to be recognized for that and the tremendous job that has brought forward. And I think all members of this House during those days recognized that and appreciated the bill. And I know in my community, a number of my constituents have mentioned that to me and said, you know, it in no way compensates us, but it was a nice recognition. I know when I mentioned earlier, when I look at some of my fire halls in Nicktaw, and we often joke that Chet Balcom has put his entire life into that fire department of 50 years, and Chet, when you look at that fire department and the amount of work that has gone into that, men like Chet and women across my constituency need to be recognized, and this would be just a small way of doing that. It was rather interesting when the power was out in Western Nova Scotia last November. It was the volunteer firefighters and the EMO coordinators who came forward, who left their homes, and in many cases, you know, their families were without power, and they were moving into the central spots to ensure that the emergency shelters were open for all of us to go into and ensure that there was some warmth and food. They were ensuring that the senior members of our community were being looked after. And Mr. Speaker, that went on for a number of days. And this in no way would recognize, and again I will say that this is in no way will recognize the overall contribution that they make, and nor is it intended to. It's intended really to be used as a way of saying thank you. When I look in Middleton, for example, when that was happening, and you know, it was within a matter of within hours when they found a generator and a farmer's farm that they brought in town, ran the tractor, had the fire hall up and going. They had a room in the fire hall set up where a doctor was coming in for elderly patients who were on oxygen. They were being there while volunteers were coming in, providing food to ensure that those in the community were being looked after in the way they should be. We went into the community of Lawrencetown, where immediately upon this emergency, the evacuation plan went into effect, and that fire hall was up and going immediately. It is, and that is all through the effort of volunteers. We often say that they're out protecting us at the worst times of the day and night, but they're also out in some of the best times of our day and night, volunteering, trying to raise money to ensure that the equipment is there when we require it, when it's there to make sure that it's funded properly. I remember unfortunately, one of my siblings had the unfortunate pleasure or unfortunate of having a fire in one winter night, and I'm very pleased to say that they were all got out of the house and were fine. They lost their property, which is a very small thing, but it was amazing to me that night when we were there in the middle of a snowstorm and wind blowing, and the men and women, not only from the Bridgetown and Annapolis Royal Fire Departments who came in, but from all over Annapolis County who came forward to ensure that they did their very best that they tried to protect that property. It's that kind of selfless act, Mr. Speaker, that this bill is trying to recognize. I think, you know, every speaker has spoken about the number of volunteers in our community and how the face of our community would be so much different without them, and there is absolutely no way this government or any other government could perform the services that they do. And I will go back to say to you that not only is this a recognition of our volunteer firefighters, but it is a recognition of the EMO and the emergency people who are out there ensuring that our families, when needed, have the expertise and people there willing to step up and support us. So, Mr. Speaker, I am very pleased to have spoke on this for the member from Clare, and we will look forward to supporting this bill as it goes forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The time allotted for this bill has expired. The honourable member of Cape Breton South on the next order of business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill 151?
Bill number 151. The honourable member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to discuss Bill 151, the Water Royalty Act, which I introduced April the 18th, 2005. What prompted me, Mr. Speaker, to submit this bill to the legislature is down in western Nova Scotia. We have an American company coming in there that came and found a great water resource, or thought they have. So they decided that they would bottle water there, millions and millions of liters per year, and ship it to the United States and also maybe to Europe. We have other companies that I know have knowledge of that are watching this one, and we also have local people down there that's watching this. If they're going to bottle water, so aren't we. So it's beginning, Mr. Speaker. And this bill will require water bottlers in this province who sell our water outside and inside of the province to pay a royalty to the province of Nova Scotia. A royalty on fresh water that is bottled for consumption by consumers will do two things. First, it will help protect our precious natural resource of fresh water. And second, a royalty will help generate revenue for the province to manage this precious resource. Mr. Speaker, keep in mind that we can live without oil and gas, but we cannot live without water. Yet we collect royalties on oil and gas, so surely we're going to collect royalties for the proper management of a vital resource such as our fresh drinking water. Mr. Speaker, water is similar to our air that we breathe in this province. It belongs to us all. We cannot survive without drinking water. It is a necessity of life and of our well-being of each and every one of us. Something this important must be very well managed for the future of our people's needs. We cannot just let anyone come to this province and let them help themselves to this very important resource without them giving something back to it. Our water resource in the future is going to be in high demand. It's already in moderate demand as we speak. As other countries run low on drinking water from a lack of proper management on their own part, our water will be a very valuable resource. Tempting who knows how many bottling plants to start up production in this province, to send away to who knows where. Mr. Speaker, we, the people of Nova Scotia, who depend on this water as a necessity for life, do not have a say in the management of it, and I'm afraid we will be in trouble with our supply of fresh drinking water in the not-too-distant future. Mr. Speaker, royalties received for the people of this province will give us the interest to properly manage this vital resource. In order to properly manage, we must have royalties from it for the management department that must police this for our future needs. Mr. Speaker, first of all, we must find out how much water we do have in this province that can be used for our drinking purposes and everyone else's that wants it in the world. Secondly, we must find out how much we are using now and will use in the future. To properly manage a resource, you must know how much you have to manage.
Order, please. The honourable member allow for an introduction. Thank you. The honourable member Cape Breton Nova, an introduction.
I'd like to thank the honourable member for the introduction. And I'd like to bring the member's attention to the West Gallery today. In the West Gallery, we have Mindy McNeil from the riding of Cape Breton Nova, who's graduating from St. Mary's University. In the centre, we have Patricia Nichols, who just graduated from the nursing school, St. Francis Xavier, and Lorway Goss is in his, this will be his third year upcoming in law school at Dalhousie, and I'd like for them to have a warm welcome at the house and stand and get a warm welcome at the house.
We welcome our special guest to the gallery today and hope they enjoy the proceedings. Thank you to the honourable member for Digby Annapolis for that, and the honourable member has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Third, we must find out our annual rainfall and continue to measure this forever. Water levels must be kept in check continuously as water is pumped out and shipped away to other countries and for our own use. This is going to take tremendous people power in the future for the proper management of this vital resource. Mr. Speaker, let's not forget that fresh drinkable water is a resource that becomes more scarce all the time. Although it is often referred to all over the world as a renewable resource, the water supply for all practical purposes is limited. That is why other countries are looking at us for their water needs of the future. Mr. Speaker, let us not lose sight of this, and let us not lose this opportunity to put in place a way to manage one of our most precious resources of this province. Mr. Speaker, we must not let this go by and find out years down the road that we didn't miss the water until the well run dry. Mr. Speaker, by thinking ahead of what is to come, we can become one of the great stewards of one of the most precious resources this province owns. Mr. Speaker, in closing, I want to stress that this bill is for the good of all the people of Nova Scotia. And we, the members of this House, should not let politics stand in the way of this vital bill that can protect and direct Nova Scotia's water supply for the future. Mr. Speaker, it is just good common sense that we take care of our natural resource of this province for the future generations to come. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would like to share the rest of my time with the member of Preston, please.
The member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. How much time do I have this time?
This time you have 8 minutes.
8 minutes. Long time. Better beats 30 seconds. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a very important topic, as my colleague from Digby Annapolis has indicated. It's a very important topic. One thing in this world we cannot live without is water. Pretty well anything else we can do without. And you see, the countries, the Arab countries and the other countries who have the rich oil reserves, selling us oil and hold us to ransom for high prices and high gasoline prices and home heating fuel and everything else. Although these same countries need water. So it only makes sense that we put an export tax, a small export tax on the water that we can use in Nova Scotia for all kinds of different things that will help Nova Scotians. And it's long overdue that something like this is put in place. I know there's some problems, probably problems with agreements with the Americans and under free trade agreement and other things, but I'm sure those could be negotiated very, very easily with the right approach, especially when you're going to export outside of North America. And the idea of having someone else help Nova Scotia pay down the tremendous debt we have in the province, which seems to be growing daily, would be an ideal situation to use some of the money for that. Or perhaps we could have some extra money we could put into roads, or extra money we could put into health care, extra money we could put anywhere, and many of the things that we need in this province that need to be done for the residents of Nova Scotia. We see daily requirements coming to government that they need to spend money on different programs, many programs that are very worthwhile, and the province simply doesn't have the money to do it. What a better way to get funds than putting another burden on the taxpayers in Nova Scotia, put the burden where it should be on resources that we're shipping out of the country to have the people that are receiving on the other end help pay for the benefits that we receive in Nova Scotia. I think that's long overdue. And it's an excellent idea the member from Digby Annapolis has come up with, especially when he sees this in his own backyard and sees the potential of this and what could happen to his community if the resource is depleted in Nova Scotia. And again, if you don't know exactly what the resource is, how do you know how much you can export? So that's a serious issue too, and that's going to cost the province money to find out. It's going to cost some serious money to find that out, and probably a tremendous amount of study to really realize when you reduce the water levels in the province what the long-term effect is, say in 50 years, 100 years, or 200 years' time. So those are things that could be addressed and paid for by this sort of surcharge or charge on the water, whatever you want to call it, that's addressed in the bill. So I think it's important that we do these things. And again, I stress, with the absolute debt burden we have in the province of Nova Scotia, anything we can do to help reduce that debt burden in any way, either provide a service that we would have to pay for otherwise, or actually reduce the debt in some way that someone else is paying for, I think is a benefit to all Nova Scotians, and indeed the country. So every time we can get some revenues from outside of Canada, I know when I was in the export business in my manufacturing facility, we called them real dollars. When you get a dollar in from the Americans or Europe or Mexico or even Africa, someplace, it were real dollars in the country. And they actually displaced $7 at that time of every dollar that was turned in the province. So $1 equals $7. So that was a fantastic turnaround in that regard. So anything we can do to make someone else pay for our water that they willingly would be paying for because they can't get it any other way, I think is an excellent idea. The member from Digby Annapolis has been working very hard on this and doing an excellent job in his community and working with the community members and the people who are coming there to work in the industry, the water industry, and that's going to become a very big industry. And you see the cost of oil, crude oil increasing. It'd be nice someday to maybe tie the cost of water to the price of crude oil. It'd be quite an interesting scenario if all of a sudden the Arab countries that desperately need water found out that every time they put the price of crude oil up, the water they're buying from Canada or somewhere else that needs their oil went up as well. They might hesitate before they put the price of oil up again. That'd be an interesting scenario, especially if the funds were going to the taxpayers of the province of Nova Scotia or any results in Canada that might be exporting water to benefit the communities here that are hard hit by high energy costs. So I think that it's important that these things are put in place quickly, so we have the resources to work through the necessary research projects needed to go on with the water levels and what the effect removing the water from the province will have, and also to help put programs in place for Nova Scotians at no cost to Nova Scotians for a change. Usually everything we do in this province we have to pay for, either through the federal government programs that are in place or through taxation, direct taxation to the people in our community. And this would be a pleasant change in that regard. And I would encourage the government to call this bill and to implement it as we go forward and try to improve the situation and lifestyle of Nova Scotians in this province. And it is so important to remember that as we go through these processes, we have to look out 50 years, 100 years' time and see what kind of impact it will have on our communities. And think about that, and it's very difficult to visualize that far ahead. When you think about the concerns we now have with water quality and the improvements they're making in treatment systems for sewer that ensure that our water tables and our water qualities are higher, we have to look at these things. And it costs a lot of money to do these things and to rectify them. So again, anything we can do to get someone else to pay for our costs is a bonus to the province of Nova Scotia. And we have to work towards these goals. And unfortunately, if really progressive ideas like this aren't put in place as put forward by the member from Digby Annapolis, we will not be able to do those things and help all Nova Scotians. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Recognize the honourable member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise today to speak on Bill 151, the Water Royalties Act. And certainly the value of water is recognized as a key principle in the province's provincial drinking water strategy. You know, a constant supply of clean drinking water for drinking is essential for all of us. And I do appreciate the members opposite, the comments that they've made, and also certainly appreciate the hospitality of the member who put the bill into the House for allowing me to come up and have a tour of the area in question that is of concern in his area. And we were able to gather some information. We were able to do a site visit, and we were able to talk with some of the people who live close to where the proposed water bottling plant is. And I do want to thank him for that. We've had some good discussions, and I've certainly learned and appreciated those. We do have a drinking water strategy, though, Mr. Speaker. There's some things that I'd like to point out with regards to water in the province of Nova Scotia. There are some things that are taking place that are very valuable and are, I guess, essential from the points that have been made here today. We've got a provincial water drinking strategy which outlines a pretty dynamic plan for the protection and the conservation of our water for all Nova Scotians and for years to come. And I know the points have been made that, you know, you have to be careful because when the well is dry, the well is dry. And I'm very pleased to say that there is a great deal of action that's taking place, certainly within the department that I'm part of, but with regards to a lot of interdepartmental discussions to ensure that we have safe drinking water. I'd also like to point out, Mr. Speaker, that the value of the water is extremely hard to determine or to set a royalty on, and that's not because it's difficult to pick a price, but it really doesn't matter what price or what fee that you're going to put on water. We need it. It's necessary for life. It's necessary for all of us to survive. So water is really priceless, and also putting a royalty onto the water doesn't necessarily mean there'll be less consumption or more consumption, or that things would be protected any differently than they're protected now. And so we are looking at things, and we'll work cooperatively, certainly with everybody in the House, to make sure that we have clean and good drinking water for our grandchildren as time goes on. Other jurisdictions across Canada already, well, I guess no other jurisdictions across Canada, no other provinces have a royalty on bottled water at this point in time. So this would be forging new ground. And I know that the bill was introduced to look at a specific issue, but from a provincial point of view, we'd have to look at everything. We'd have to look at everything from one tip of the province to the other if a royalty was to be imposed, and that, we believe, could pose some problems. Nova Scotia does collect annual water fees from any company or individual that draws large quantities of water currently. So anybody who withdraws more than 23,000 liters or 5,000 gallons of water a day requires an approval from the Department of Environment and Labor. And there is a usage fee that's charged based on the amount of withdrawal required, and a fixed administration fee. So there is some money that comes back into the province with regards to these approvals, and it's charged to support our water management systems, and it allows us to do some things such as track water use across the province. So we do track the amount of water that's used, determine what it's used for, and certainly determine how it's disposed of, because that's also an issue with regards to the department. At this point in time, there's about 375 water withdrawal approvals in place across the province. And these fees apply to municipalities, to industries, to power companies, and certainly to others. And they also include 3 bottled water companies, and they do have approvals at this point in time. I'd like to point out as well that the approval system applies to agricultural users, which accounts for about 100 of those 375 approvals. Although agricultural industries or withdrawals are exempted from any annual fees, it is significant the amount of water that the agricultural industry would withdraw. Bottled water companies account for less than 0.5% of the total water withdrawals in the province of Nova Scotia. So it is a very small amount. And again, you know, it's less than half of 1%. And that's not a great deal of water when we look at the overall consumption in the province. The 3 companies operating in Nova Scotia now draw, I think, a little over 1.6 million liters of water per day. which is certainly significant, but in the overall drawdown in the impact of the province, it's pretty minimal. Because currently we have approvals in the province for a withdrawal of 3.3 billion liters of water each day. And that number is kind of staggering, and this was brought to my attention yesterday during estimates when we were talking about this. And, 3.3 billion liters a day is a fair amount of water to be taking from whatever means we take it from, either surface water or wells or aquifers, and we always need to be vigilant and careful and make sure that we do monitor where this water is going, how much we are drawing, and what effects we are having on others who happen to be close by the source where this water is removed from. So the whole industry, including bottled water companies, accounts for about 6% of the total amount of water withdrawn in the province on a daily basis. So the bottled water companies are not the large users. They really only account for 6% of that 3.3 billion that's withdrawn on a daily basis. Now, this doesn't include power companies, which use water to generate hydroelectric power. But they don't really extract the water. They just use it on its route to the ocean and make some electricity from it on the way. Agriculture is about 66% of the amount of water, and that would account for the greatest draw that we have in any single day. The vast majority of Nova Scotians already enjoy high-quality, safe drinking water, and the best way to maintain that is certainly through what we've developed and consider a multi-barrier approach to protection. We need to keep it clean. It's fairly simple when you look at protecting water. We need to keep it clean. If it isn't clean, we need to make it safe to drink. And once we've made it safe to drink or we've kept it clean, we need to make sure that we test it to ensure that it continues to be safe to drink for the population of the province and anybody else who may be drinking the water. The drinking water strategy is based on the multi-barrier approach, as I just mentioned, and confirms the commitment to making the protection of our province's water our #1 priority. And I didn't realize prior to joining the department how much or how many resources, probably how much money, how much time, effort is spent working to conserve, to protect, to maintain the drinking water of the province of Nova Scotia. And I've said a number of times I took for granted. I grew up in a home that had a dug well that never went dry and had good water and just thought that's the way everybody else's was as well. I've found, to a bit of my surprise, that certainly isn't true for the whole province. And water is not something that everybody can count on, and it's something that none of us should ever take for granted. However, I am pleased to say that from the department's point of view and from government's point of view, everybody appreciates how important this commodity is and this resource is, and just what we have to do to make sure that we are taking very, very good care of it. Pleased to report that the commitments set out in the 3-year plan have been successfully achieved through a collaborative team effort by all government industries, or by all governments, industries, and individuals in the province. And some of our successes over the last 3 years include the renewal of operating approvals for all municipal water systems. We need to monitor to make sure we know what's out there. Developing a due diligence handbook for municipal councillors and other water utility owners so that people have some consistent guidelines that we expect them to work by, so that we can maintain the quality of water for people who certainly need it. And also developing educational materials for private well owners. It's not something that you can take for granted. It's something that you have to be continually educating the population and educating those who install wells, those who install municipal waterways, those who install treatment plants. So implementation of the strategy has been overseen by an interdepartmental drinking water management committee, which includes senior representatives from 6 government departments, in addition to environment and labor. And they're, not surprisingly, agriculture and fisheries because of the water use there, health, who used to do the testing at one point in time for water, for wells and other things. Natural Resources, who are involved with water courses. Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations. We have Tourism and Culture. And certainly, last but not least, we have Transportation and Public Works. So I certainly understand the desire to protect the precious resource. However, I do have some concerns as to the approach that's being proposed, and the honourable member opposite and I have discussed this, so he does know what my concerns are. We're not sure, I guess, that charging more for the water is going to preserve the resource anymore, but we also have some other challenges with regards to the legal ability for the province to be able to do that. There are also a number of good systems in place across government that are there and do look at water quality. Environment and Labour employs hydrogeologists. We have watershed planners. We also have other water specialists across the province whose job it is to help us assess and to protect our water. And these specialists support provincial activities and work with municipal and public water supply operators. We offer some expertise and advice to assist these people. They track water data and help us to perform important assessments to the quantity and the quality of surface and groundwater in respect to specific applications for withdrawals or activities or incidents which may threaten our water supplies. And we have to, the same as everyone in this room and beyond, have to be ever vigilant to make sure that we protect that water because we just appreciate how important it is for everyone. We also have some concerns, as I said, over the legalities and the ramifications of charging a royalty on water. NAFTA rules may be a factor in considering a royalty, and there are no other provinces, as I mentioned, who are currently charging the royalty. But those are some issues that we are looking into. We are checking into this. We certainly take the thought behind the bill very seriously. The protection of water is extremely important. We just don't know if it's the proper way at this point in time for us to proceed. Staff are still getting some more information on the issue, and we may not have the flexibility to look at any kind of a royalty fee. So we do have to look at that. And also, since farmers and municipalities are some of the largest users, we do have some concerns as to the costs that a decision might impose on those two sectors in particular, because if we make a decision, it would have to be province-wide. It couldn't be isolated. So I'm sure it goes without saying, access to safe drinking water is not a goal that's isolated to Nova Scotia. I think it's worthwhile mentioning that Nova Scotia is participating in the Canadian Council of the Ministers of the Environment initiative to analyze water conservation measures and economic instruments, including water pricing. So throughout Canada, there are discussions between Ministers of the Environment on water pricing. Everybody appreciates it's worth more than we pay for it now. Nobody seems to have the answer at this point in time as to how much it's worth or how the best process that we could develop to do water pricing, but there are discussions that are taking place. And through the provincial drinking water strategy, we're also reviewing the current water approval fee structure. So it's important, I guess it's important to know that we aren't isolated here. We do have a lot of other people, a lot of other governments, whether they be municipal or provincial or federal, looking at what are the best processes for us to take, or what are the best routes for us to take in the future to make sure that we maintain what we have. We did pass a bill in this House a number of years ago, a couple of years ago, to stop the bulk export of water. And at that point in time, it became obvious that that was a concern for the future, and this legislature saw fit to pass that piece of legislation to make sure that bulk water could not be transported, and that left the ability for people to bottle or process water on-site and in Nova Scotia to be able to export that water, but it had to be produced here. And the intent and the concern at that point in time was the amount that could possibly leave by way of ship or tankers or other means. And whereas if you look at a bottling plant, and there's still a lot of water that is pumped from the ground each day, as we said, however, it's shipped out by truck in smaller containers, and is much more controllable and something that can be managed, can be monitored, can be watched by the Department of the Government, and we can determine exactly how much water is leaving or how much is being withdrawn from the ground to ensure that we have the data that we need to follow along in the future and ensure that we have a handle on what's going on. So I'd like to thank you for this opportunity. I hope this sheds some light from a department's perspective.
Thank you. I'll recognize the honourable member for Hants East.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad to have an opportunity to speak to this bill, and I want to say to the member for Digby Annapolis, good on you. This is a really an interesting idea. I think probably one that's long overdue, and I'm not sure how much I could speak to the mechanics of how this should be done. The minister raised some interesting points, and I'll speak to some of those only as much in layman's terms because of if he's got staff researching some of those points. I'm not going to try to make anybody think that I have all the background information that a staff might be able to get, but I want to say, I guess I want members of the House in particular and all Nova Scotians to think a little bit about water and the value of it. And the minister said, you know, it's difficult to determine what that royalty should be if it's possible to do that. But something we, I think for the most part, take for granted. It's probably only been in recent years when people actually have been buying bottled water that they've really started to think about the issue at all. And prior to that, water was one of those things that you never gave much thought to. I'm in a situation similar to the minister. I grew up, you know, on a small farm. It had a well. We had a good supply of water and never gave it much thought. And the idea, actually, to me, of buying water is almost the same as buying air. That you know, this is such a valuable commodity that it's something that I think should really be regulated in a way that provides a benefit to Nova Scotians. And I worry certainly on a national scale what it is that our country does in terms of its water supply. And I want to say, the minister mentioned about you know, research into international agreements. He mentioned NAFTA in particular. And you know, Mr. Speaker, it's strange that so many things that we want to do, you know, domestically, we always have to look and see, well, you know, how have we tied our own hands in terms of the international agreements that we've entered into, and we've done those. The beneficiaries of those agreements are not just the ordinary people, you know, walking the street in this country, but they really seem to be agreements that are tied to a benefit for corporations rather than for people. And I'd like to see governments, or at least the negotiators for governments who sign these agreements or negotiate these agreements to actually use people as the bottom line. And how does this agreement improve the lives of the people that politicians represent? That's what I'd like to see to be the number one priority in negotiating agreements is how does this benefit the people at home first? And it's not clear to me that is the issue. It seems to be, how does this benefit a corporation coming here, number one, and how does this agreement benefit any of our corporations or any of our industries that want to move out of here into another jurisdiction and won't be too greatly impacted by rules and regulations in those areas? The minister raised the issue of agriculture, and presently there is an exemption, a water license authorizing use of agriculture, conservation, or beautification purposes is exempt from a fee. And
user fees, allocations to 23,000 liters per day or greater. The annual fee for an authorized use of water withdrawn from a water course shall be determined as follows. Water license for municipal, recreational, industrial, and domestic purposes, a minimum fee. The minimum fee for a water license shall be $53.25 unless as otherwise provided under Section 1 and 2(4). Annual fee calculation, the license fee shall be derived by summing the subtotals calculated as follows. For each million liters per day up to 2 million liters per day is $117.15. For each additional million liters per day over 2 million liters per day up to 9 million liters per day is $122.47. For each additional million liters per day over 9 million liters per day up to 27 million liters per day is $133.12. So, Mr. Speaker, for each additional million liters per day over 27 million liters per day up to 90 million liters per day is $138.45. For each million liters per day over 90 million liters per day is $143.77. Now, Mr. Speaker, when we say what value do we place on water, we're not placing any value on water. And presently in this province, we are not placing any value on water. Now, there is legislation before this, well, I should say before this House, in this province actually, that we can't sell bulk water. So I applaud the government for that legislation. And if my memory's right, it was this government, because I've been here since '98, and I think that bill came through the House since '98, and I don't think it was in the '98-'99 year. So, that's a smart move. I would think that if the government did that, they would have done the NAFTA research and the whole 9 yards to determine whether or not that legislation would stand the test. It would stand the NAFTA test. And as far as I know, nobody's challenged it. So I'm thinking that probably the groundwork on where we can go on a royalty has probably already been done. And but I certainly encourage the minister and his staff to go down that road for sure. And I'd like him to. His comments were interesting ones, and I'd like him to be thinking, in a positive way of supporting this legislation, and if possible, if it meant he couldn't support it, that he would come up with something that would be similar but appropriate, that would still meet the intent for the member from Digby Annapolis, because this is a very good idea. This is a very good idea. And I think the member from Digby Annapolis should be applauded for it. And I know it's probably one of those issues that, because it's happening in his backyard, that he's a little bit sensitized to it. And so that's where this came from. And actually, I don't think it would be a ridiculous notion to think about a maximum price on water, that a retail maximum price. But so that we take into consideration the value of water and the ability of people to buy it. And this is not an item that I think should wind up with the vagaries of the marketplace, and that there will be people of low income who someday won't be able to afford bottled water. I mean, that's this is. If we're going down this road, let's do the whole investigation here and find out in terms of what it costs to get this substance out of the ground and get it bottled. And everything I've heard tends to make me believe that the technology around pumping water out of the ground has been around for a while, and the packaging. This is pretty low cost per liter, and I think it's well within the purview of the government to think about, should we have a maximum price assigned to water sales so that Nova Scotians can afford to buy it. And people might say, ha ha, a hearty belly laugh on that. But I'll tell you, there was a day when I'm sure people would have had a hearty laugh on the thought that you actually would go into a store and buy it, that you would buy water at all. Never enter people's minds, I'm sure. So this is one that looking down the road, I would like to see some thought go into this. 6% of the draw is bottled water, the minister said, and I was glad to hear him talk about agriculture and if the local fish plant has its own well, I'm not sure that since they're creating jobs and whatever that they would have to be paying for water, but people should consider that the water cycle is a natural cycle, and the question of water in aquifers is an issue of it's not really clear unless the minister may correct me and the province is all mapped and we know exactly how much water there is, but I would say we probably don't. And with that in mind, there may be a reason to think about how many facilities we want in a particular area, and maybe put a limit on the draw per year or whatever. But if somebody, if one area, one company has found an aquifer and 10 more apply or buy land around and they all sink into that aquifer, maybe we want to set a limit to just how much draw we actually want to take there, and say, all right, there's a limit here in this area, then you have to try somewhere else. But we don't want to run our resource to a point where what we're left with is people using purely surface water. There's all kinds of reasons to worry about that. It's the whole process of percolation through soil to the water table that aids in the purification of water, and obviously there would be those contaminants that process is not going to take care of, because we run the risk in this environment of more dissolved contaminants than we ever used to. But to have a secure, safe supply of water for Nova Scotians, number one, would be my concern. And the minister, if I remember his comments correctly, I think it was almost to the point of worried about charging an amount that would affect businesses trying to do this. Well, I think that the minister, first of all, his priority number one should be water supply for Nova Scotians, and then some way to determine how much of that supply we can actually risk in selling. And he mentioned as well about the specialists in his area, the hydrogeologists and so on, and that they give fairly good, up-to-date scientific information about the geology of the province and the water supply in the province. And I want to say to the minister, you can have a team of hydrogeologists and specialists and whatever category or title you want to give them, that can tell you, to the nth degree about the water supply, but they will be worth absolutely nothing to you if this province or this country sells its water rights. Doesn't matter what information you have. If you lose control of your water, you lose control of your water. And so I agree with the member from Digby Annapolis, and I encourage the province to secure its supply. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I'll take my seat. Thank you.
The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to speak on this Bill 151. I agree with some of the statements made by the minister, and the previous speaker, but I also take strong exception to some of the remarks. Mr. Speaker, it's history repeating itself here. We have what we're all saying is the number one resource. We have lots of it, and here we are willing to allow U.S. companies to come in. We are subsidizing foreign companies to come in to take our natural resources for free and create a business where they're going to make money. And when I say history repeating itself, I think of my poor father down in the hold of these ships when they were shipping coal when I was a kid with a pan shovel, shoveling the coal over in the corners of these gigantic ships, breathing in the dust and the dirt and everything else, and working like a bull to make a living for us. Oh boy, he got a small wage for that, which we survived on. But who made all the money? Our natural resources were shipped out by rail. They were shipped out by these ships. Here we are now. We've got one thing that we cannot live without is water, and we're willing to let it go. Mr. Speaker, what I want to quote from is part of the Halifax Herald last year. While most of the 30-odd countries serving with NATO's International Security Assistance Force import their water from the Persian Gulf, France has been flying its water in from Europe at a cost of 3.40 euros or $5.50 Canadian a litre. What we're saying is, the honourable member, the previous speaker, said we should probably put a maximum price on it. When I was a kid, I could remember you could go to the garage and you couldn't put $2 worth of gas in a 5-gallon can. You'd overflow it. Now, $2 worth of gas in there, you can put it in with a teacup. That's how valuable it's increased, Mr. Speaker. And 105, the same as yourself, sir. And the thing is, Mr. Speaker, it's okay to joke and laugh about this, but we got a very valuable resource that's serious, and I wish I had 2 hours instead of 10 minutes left to speak on it. 1.6 million litres a day, Mr. Speaker. 1.6 million litres a day is what the Honourable Minister said that is being bottled. Not all that long ago, I laughed in Cape Breton when I saw water in fridges, in stores for sale. Selling water in Cape Breton, I thought it was whoever got into that business had to be somewhat disillusioned, because we hunted and fished and we drank from the streams, and every time we turned on the tap there was good clean water, as the honourable members mentioned about growing up on a farm. Right now I live in a place where the well is only 14 feet deep. Beautiful, clean, pure water. But if you take that from my property on the Bador Lake is worth nothing. You couldn't give it away. What good would it be without water? That's the only thing that's making it valuable. Mr. Speaker, right now, the proposed strip mining in Cape Breton, the number one fear of the residents in Cape Breton and in my area, Victoria the Lakes, and especially on Bullitree Island, is the fear of losing the water. That's how valuable it is, and they'll all tell you at their meetings, take whatever you want from my property, but don't take my water. The water strategy is number one, as the Honourable Minister mentioned, and Mr. Speaker, that's the way it should be, to guard the valuable water that we have. But what I find interesting, or I guess it's an oxymoron, as I've been quoting most of the day when I spoke, it seems the government is interested in doing business or doing work that costs the taxpayer money. What about something that we can get from our natural resource, something that would create money? And I'll give you an example. In Scotland, off the coast of Scotland, they put a surcharge of a cent, 1 cent a barrel on oil. Now, you say, well, I mean, a cent a barrel, how much is that going to be? They have millions and millions of dollars in a fund. And what they do with that fund is they've built rinks, sidewalks, roads, recreational facilities. They've put amenities into the communities. The communities have the resource, but the communities benefited from the resource. What do we have here? Our resources going out the window and saying, thank you very much, sir. You have a nice day. They did the same thing with our steel plant down there in Cape Breton. We had a rail mill. That was the good part. They took that to the mainland. Anything else that came along, they came in from England, Ireland, and so long as you had a foreign ownership, you took the goodies and left the garbage for the Sydney steel plant. And of course, all we had was the one good rail mill, and you can't survive on one source. And then when that's gone, everybody seemed to be happy. But Mr. Speaker, what I'm saying is we've got something here. You can't put you're talking about a cent a litre. That would make this province rich with their natural resources. That would help resolve the problems that we have with the escalating costs for our highways. Our rural areas would benefit. The whole province would benefit, Mr. Speaker. I have a retired engineer in my area living down the Middle River by the name of Bruce Aikman. And I have to quote Mr. Aikman. He's a very smart person. And he said to me one time, Gerald, he said, why is it that our resources are always controlled by somebody else for the benefit of somebody else? We never seem to control them for ourselves. And he used the analogy of getting, I think it was $3 for a large stick of wood at his farm gate, and by the time it was processed, there would probably be 5 to 7 boards in that piece of wood, and one of those boards were coming back processed at $11 for one board, and he's giving the whole thing away for $3. So it's the same thing. Like I said, history repeating itself. Let's go back to the newspapers again, and we'll quote from here. It's incredible that the government allows multinational companies to extract millions of liters of water per day from Nova Scotia for just the price of $117.15 license. The companies bottle the water, sell it at a higher price than the gasoline, and reap huge profits. Terrio wants the government to start charging royalties. It's long overdue, and the Tories know it. It's a great bill. And that was from David Rodenizer in the Daily News. Mr. Speaker, anybody who thinks that they can't change anything because of because of NAFTA, a very senior lawyer that's been around for a long time, pushing 80 years of age, maybe around the same age as myself, according to the honourable members across the way, said that the British North American Act can overrule anything in NAFTA. And anybody that doesn't know that in the lawyer profession is not worth their salt. That was a quote that gentleman gave us just last night. And like I said, Mr. Speaker, I laughed when they put the water on sale down in Cape Breton, and I couldn't believe that anybody would be buying it. And I was almost shocked when the minister said that 6% now of the water market is being sold. And I myself, now, every day when you have a lunch, you buy a bottle of water. It was never thought of before. And, Mr. Minister, it's a resource giveaway. That's the best way to put it. But we have to find a way that we can make money for our communities. We should benefit from our natural resources, not foreign ownership, not outside interests, not be giving it away. And as I said in the beginning, here we are with history repeating itself. So, Mr. Speaker, I have to reiterate the number one fear for the people in Cape Breton and in my area in particular is the fear of losing their water because of the proposed mining, remedial mining or strip mining or surface mining as it's being called. And we are going to sit back and allow companies to come in. If they can come in and take for free our water, then they're going to be taking our aggregate, gravel, whatever you want to call it, and taking that for free. Mr. Speaker, I'm wondering, when are we going to stop the repetition of history repeating itself and create an industry for us? We have it all here. All we have to do is develop what we have. Rather than that, we'd rather give away what we have. And Mr. Speaker, I think I've said enough. With that, I feel I should conclude my remarks because I should mention before I sit down that the farmers down in Bulledry, and the Honourable Minister mentioned that agriculture consumes 66% of the water on a daily basis. And there's a strong concern in the farming community down in Bulledry about the loss of water for their farms also. And there's a young lady down there by the name of Campbell, Rita Campbell, who has a well that's only 30 feet deep, and she services a tremendous amount of hothouse plants and perennials and young trees and shrubs. That's her livelihood, that's her business, and is the sole source of income for her family, and she has the same fear as the farmers, Mr. Speaker. So having said all that, I would really hope that the Honourable Minister would take what we have said into consideration, and there's only one thing that I could say that in conclusion, is that it makes common sense, and I urge the government to move this bill forward and to think of what Mr. Aikman said. Why should we have our resources controlled by others for the benefit of others? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the honourable member for Waverley Fall River Beaver Bank.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise in the House and talk about something that's near and dear to most individuals. In fact, I can remember as a small child back home in Hants County, my grandmother walking a mile and a half carrying a bucket of water when in fact she had a pump in the house because it was good water. Now, Mr. Speaker, I also have had the pleasure of working with Centre for Water Resources Study and watched the development of the well water industry in this province as a professional industry. And I believe that professionalism in that industry is a lead up to the direction we're taking as a government to protect our water sources and to make sure that this country and this province has water that's fit for consumption. My community of Fall River has terrible problems with quality and as well as quantity in many of the subdivisions. So I hear daily what it's like not to have good water. In fact, I've got somewhere in the vicinity of $5,000 worth of treatment on my water to assure that I have good water. So I like the suggestion coming forward from the opposition. I agree with my minister that we have to make sure that in going forward that we're doing our duty, we're doing what's best for the country.